Hello. Welcome back to AWBW's Mom and Pop Comics Talk. We are your comics parents, Wendy and Tyler Chin-Tanner. And tonight we are turning the tables on ourselves, much like we did when we had kids. And instead of us being the hosts, we are bringing on a very special host tonight to interview us, Lisa Lee Herrick, who is our friend, but more importantly, she's an incredible writer, artist, producer, and she's just received the PEN America Emerging Writers Fellowship this year. Lisa, welcome. We are your subjects.
Lisa.
Thanks so much for having me here. It's so exciting to see the work that's coming from away from the world, all the great anthologies and the exciting new boundaries that you guys are crossing with the anthologies, as well as all of the established emerging artists and writers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're excited. Yeah.
So I thought we would change up the format a little bit. I wanted to play a game because I think that sometimes in our little worlds here, we get so focused on what we need to do and where we need to be that sometimes we forget that not everyone knows our backstory. So, I did do a little digging around. I watched episodes 1, 2, and 3. They were awesome. And I especially loved episode 1, your conversation with your daughters, Maddie and Lucy, and how they talked about how, the shared love of literature and comics and drawing is a whole family enterprise. Especially that the girls love drawing rabbits and mice and cats, but horses are hard. So I thought that for our very first challenge, I would give all 3 of us 30 seconds to draw a horse.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
30 seconds?
I have my clipboard with my white paper, and I have my chisel tip pen. So for any of you following along live or after the recording, feel free to go ahead and see if you can draw a horse within 30 seconds too.
30
so
seconds.
I'm going to do a quick countdown and start the clock. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yikes. Oh my Lord. What does a horse look like? I grew up in Brooklyn.
I grew up with girls who loved drawing horses. I unfortunately was not one of those girls.
You're also a pro artist, so you don't get to talk. Both of you. This is not fair.
Now, Tyler, you mentioned in episode 1 that one of a comic artist's greatest nightmares is to have to draw like a battle scene with like a ton of horses. Why is that?
Horses, and it's complex anatomy for sure. Like anything, it's practice, sure. But yeah, the body structure, I guess we can talk about. Has it been 30 seconds yet? I feel like it's been 30 seconds.
I'm done.
Mine's a little sketchy, but I feel like I'm done.
Okay, finished. So, all right, I'm going to have the artist go first. So, Tyler, how about you show us your horse?
There's my 30-second horse.
That's awesome. All right, Wendy. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Promise you guys won't laugh, okay?
All right.
I only have 30 seconds, but this is my horse.
Hold on.
We don't know all the details, but that's there. So now that we've established that a horse is, no one actually knows what a horse looks like. Like nothing has changed since the medieval period and the Middle Ages when with that meme that goes around the internet. It's like, have you seen a horse? Of course I have. And then like the horse has like human eyes and they're both like front facing. It's like nobody still knows how to do it.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the joys of comic books, of course, is discovering how other people see the world. And then later on discovering also that it's not just one person's vision, it's actually a whole team, right? You have the writer, you have the illustrator, you have the person who does just the text, you have the person who does inking, and then the one who does coloring. And all those brains come together to create this final product that somehow makes sense. So because it's such a interesting and interactive, topic of like how do comic books happen and why should anyone care, I wanted to ask yourselves, like try to remember what age you first discovered your love of comics. And the prompt is right here.
Kenzie?
Yeah, I have you a little centered. I can open up a little bit there. I think this will help. But...
Okay, yeah. Draw yourself at the age when you first discovered your love of comics. Wow. Yeah.
And there's no time limit here. You can draw yourself. I'll draw myself too, for real this time. And I think, the interesting thing about comics for me was I was a secret comic book nerd. My parents wanted me to learn how to play the piano, the violin, to be good in math, in English, set all the grades, the GPAs, and to only read the encyclopedia and the Bible. And so, when I would go to the library, that was like the only time I could actually like read comic books. And that was like an act of rebellion for me. I'm wondering whether it's like I'm the only person who feels that way about comics, like it being like a resistance towards all the things that you have to learn at school and all the things you have to do because your parents ask you to.
Wow.
My parents never minded me getting comics, and it was reading. There was this concern that I was a little too obsessed with the fantasy worlds and not reality. And certainly, yeah, it was an escape for me. And I love comics. And I think the first ones I picked up was 4 years old, so I wasn't even really reading them. Getting them right off the newsstand.
Do you remember what it was?
I don't remember my first one because, like I said, I was just picking them up just because they had Batman and Spider-Man on it, just like I was buying Underoos or whatever. It wasn't really like a story quite yet. There were pictures and I couldn't really read I could read a little at 4. But the first one that I really remember having an effect on me was Batman Annual Number 8. That was 83. So it was 8 years old. Trevor Von Eden, and just the style of it was so different. It didn't look like, someone was following the house style. And so that's when I realized, oh, there's an artist on this and a writer, and they're making decisions and trying to do something different and original. Rather than just, you like Batman, here are some pictures of Batman type thing. So
how about you, Wendy? What did you, or when do you first, remember like your first experience with comics where you were like, wow, like I totally want to do these things someday?
I mean, my first experience with comics was through my dad, definitely. He was a huge comics fan. He emigrated to the United States in the 1940s. So as a small child. So he really came up during the time when comics were first huge. And I think, much like many kids of color at that time, he really identified with Superman, and he really identified with these characters who were not of this world. So for me, my entry into comics was with my dad as a sort of bonding experience. Like we would go every Sunday to get the New York Times and to get the New York Daily News from our sort of like, corner newsstand, which also had candy. And so he would let me have a Hershey's bar, and he would let me get comics. Like they had their stack of comics, and he would also get comics too. And I was super into Wonder Woman, and I was super into the Dazzler, which was like this like 80s skater girl. And I was super
I've never heard of the Dazzler.
Really? Yeah.
Gosh,
Yeah,
awesome.
that was I was very into that. I was I think maybe like the first comic book featuring the Dazzler that I read, there was a scene in it that really struck me. She was like this struggling artist. She was a struggling dancer and a struggling artist, and she was like a vigilante by night, of course. But, as a struggling artist, she was like starving, and she was like, living in the East Village in this crappy apartment. And what really struck me as like a 4 or 5 year old, or maybe 5 or 6 year old, was that she made tomato soup for herself out of ketchup and water. And I was like,
Oh
damn,
man.
that is devotion to art right there. That's gonna be me.
Right. And like, did you become her? Is it
Well,
funny?
I guess, although, my version of dancing is, with these, not with my feet, but yeah. I
Awesome.
guess I did.
Well, this is me, age 7.
Ah.
So for me, I lived in the city for most of my life. And my mom and my dad, who are refugees from Laos, they decided that I was getting a little bit too soft.
Mm.
And so every summer, from the ages of, I believe it was 5 or 6 until I was 17, they would ship me off to my aunt's house in the country for 3 months in the summer. So while some of my friends were going to summer school or going to Disneyland or going camping, I was in the fields picking strawberries and feeding chickens and shooting rattlesnakes. And so my cousins, I have two male cousins there. We were about the same age, and the only thing that we had access to was just his X-Men comics. And I just remember thinking at first, like, those are so strange. Like, those muscles are not possible on the human figure. But then I found the character Psylocke, and I was like, whoa, hold up. Psylocke, she looks Asian. And then I saw Jubilee, and I was like, wait, she looks Asian too. Okay, I want to know more about this X-Men universe. And it just got me on this track where I was thinking, in the 80s, so there was so little available other than Claudia Kishi, who was cool, but to me, she's not the sort of like warrior woman that I was kind of like envisioning myself to be. But sort of found my alter ego in X-Men comics.
Wow.
And I always rooted for the fact that, Psylocke, of course, she's not necessarily 100% good. There was a point in time when she wasn't that nice. But that, each of those characters had agency. And it just kind of gave me this whole new like mindset of how to think of myself. Like, I don't always have to be the good girl. I can do bad things too, but it has to be like rooted in my desire. Like, I can't just lash out at the world because I'm angry or frustrated. Because at the end of the day, I still have to be the hero of my own story. And if I can't look at myself in the mirror, then I've already failed. And I still find that in comics today, especially like as we see more autobiographical comics coming into play, where people are really revealing the layers of their lives. Having said that, do you two think or foresee a future chapter or even a book where it would reveal, in a sense, the layers of your own lives, either as memoir or as biography in comic form?
Wow. I haven't considered that. Interestingly, I mean, I'm definitely sort of toying with the idea of like memoir and creative nonfiction in the sort of like straight traditional literary sense, but that's actually a really fascinating idea. Um, just trying it on for size. I think in general, at A Wave Blue World, we have tended more towards fiction, um, not as a rule, but just I think perhaps as a matter of taste. And Tyler definitely, as a writer and artist, tends more towards fiction and more towards the fantastical. So
I think even if I tried to do my own memoir, I would accidentally fall into some fantasy story where dragon showed up and I was like, oh, right. Yeah, no, that's not real.
I think
I,
that's totally valid because, sometimes we need a different image or a symbol to be like
right.
that vehicle of meaning. I mean, it's difficult to ask any artist, no matter their discipline, to recreate reality with a full 360-degree view.
Yeah.
We have the grasp of all the minutia of one moment in reality, but to say like, here's how I experienced it. And what if you were having a psychotic break, and you tried to portray that
Mm,
in a comic book and say like, this is what I saw. Like,
right,
I know it's hard
right.
to believe, but I actually saw this and I heard this, and this is what it's like to be me. I think that's totally valid.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely valid. I think that memoir um, requires like a very particular sensibility, and I'm the type of writer and artist who thinks that genre picks you. You don't pick genre, and that each project picks its own genre. So never say never. A project can arise and announce itself as memoir probably at some point. But
Um,
I also really believe in this kind of like Jungian dream interpretation type idea of characters in people's work. Even if it's straight up fiction, I think you do put pieces of yourself in each of the characters, and you can, speak your truth through them.
right. I think it was episodes 2 and 3 when you had writers and artists from the Embodied Anthology, which is now available in bookstores as of May 18th, talk about each of them was a little resistant to be completely vulnerable
Mm,
in interpreting each other's work because they were afraid of bringing their own baggage.
right.
Sometimes that baggage is what creates that lovely friction, right? Where you
Yes.
ask questions, you're like, oh my god, like I didn't see it that way, but that like your interpretation of it went in like 3 degrees to the left. I never considered before.
Yeah.
What were some of the happiest surprises for you two as you were editing this anthology and sort of managing these multiple chapters during the pandemic?
I mean, I think that I was most surprised by how intuitive it was to put together artists with poets. It was just, surprisingly clear to us which pairings would work. And then after that, it was surprisingly clear to us what the narrative arc of the book itself would be. It was really odd in that respect because Embodied is our seventh anthology, and there have certainly been, times where we've had to move stuff around and redraft and like really think extremely carefully about how to create the narrative arcs, but that was not the case with Embodied. I think maybe because we solicited all of these writers and all of these artists around such a specific theme, perhaps, and then we chose work that spoke to us, but also that we felt was going to speak to the theme and was going to hit a kind of like ring a universal bell. I think perhaps for that reason, it just kind of all came together in this very seamless way. What surprised you?
What did surprise me? It was just came together great.
Yeah.
That just that there wasn't any sort of pitfall or no real problem happened, right? And we had to wait for some stories to come in.
Yeah.
Things sort of developed, but yeah, nothing. There's no one butted head with anything.
Yeah.
The problems came
Oh,
up.
I know what
People were very
surprised me.
excited. Yeah,
What surprised me was you and Hazel in particular, but also like our entire team during one of our like, you know, AWBW team meetings, basically being like, why didn't you put any of your poems in the book? Like,
right.
what are you doing?
Yeah, for Wendy. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that surprised me. I was like, oh, well, like that didn't occur to me.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's such a difference between like sort of like the culture of comic book artists where you're going to deviant art and you're sharing and people are fanning fan fictioning your stuff, and they're also uh, drawing their own tributes to your work, and
Right.
you're expanding your audience through that, versus literary where sometimes, especially if you go through MFA programs, like you keep things a little close to the chest because you're
Right.
just like, I'm not going to show this to anybody
mm,
until it's completely finished.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's really a greater question about the different kinds of I guess industry approaches within publishing, because
Right.
it's not just one type of publishing, right? So Tyler had a very like accomplished look on his face. I'd love to see his drawing.
Oh, I wasn't super happy with mine. And I ended up doing mostly the bad syndrome.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And Wendy?
My one.
Oh, cute.
Yeah.
I feel like we all kind of like fell in love with comics around the same age, like that 5, 6, 7, when you're suddenly striking out on your own, and you don't need to hold your mom or your dad's hand necessarily anymore, and then discovering like, oh, there's worlds beyond like my house. Like there's worlds that are fantastic and scary, but also worlds where you can see yourself as a hero.
It's
But oh, go ahead.
I feel like I have this kind of like very sensory association at that age between comics and the Hershey bar, which was like the only time I got to have one of those like big ass Hershey bars all to myself. Yeah. And also this kind of like feeling of Asian Americanness, because I realize now that the owners of that newsstand were Asian. So, they were obviously the ones who were buying the comics and sourcing them also. So, I'm thinking now as an adult and looking back at that kind of like, confluence of different things, the comics and the store itself that was owned by Asian folks, and going with my dad on Sunday, which was his only day off, and the Hershey bar, which for him was this like iconic post-war American kid treat that he introduced me to. I feel like that was like a really important Asian American New York City experience.
And now it's all come together as a publishing company that you both run as co-publishers. So I wanted to see whether you could draw or write how it feels to create a business with a loved one.
Ooh.
And you can be honest, just one word or one drawing that kind of encapsulates what it's really like to start a business with a loved one. I know for me and Lee, my husband, when we started our literary festival Lit Hop together back in 2000 and I believe it was 2015, we sat together and started asking ourselves, what do we want to do together that combines our passions? And we both love to read. We're both extroverts, and we love being around people. And also more importantly, we love like sharing the love about all of our friends' books and their achievements, and really allowing everyone to understand and discover like new books. And so for us, it's like, oh, well, just obviously we're going to do a literary festival. And then like 3 months later, we had our first fight about Lit Hop, how to run it, how to brand it, the nuts and bolts. Do we have volunteers? Where's the money going to come from? And it really like was one of those moments where it was, I think many couples who go into business together have these moments where it's like, okay, so how do we draw some boundaries here? Because we still want to be friends and we still want to be spouses, but also we want to be responsible business partners. So should we put in some rules, like no talking about the business, at dinner? Like we have work hours, and during work hours we're going to be business partners, and then after work hours we're going to return and just not bring that up. Like how do we balance that? I'd love to see your drawing or your one word that kind of like encapsulates how you feel about that process.
I had a lot of words because you know me. But it's funny that you used the word boundaries, because hello.
Wow, you came up with a lot. Differentiation, intimacy, communication, boundaries, complementarity, trust, honesty. That is almost pretty much all of it. Tyler, what did she come up with?
I didn't come up with anything. I'm just gonna take some of hers. She had extra.
No. You're a partner, and as a partner, you have to do your due diligence.
Draw a picture, babe. I think that's an interesting point, because I think that one of the keys to quite honestly, like the low conflict. Oh, you need another marker,
Okay.
hon? Yeah. Okay. Um, the low conflict nature. I mean, knock on wood, but it has been 15 years. It has been relatively low conflict, really, between us in terms of the business and in terms of collaborating together. Actually, it's like one of our great pleasures. Um, I think maybe one of the keys to that is that we are extremely complementary in the sense that we have very distinct departments that we are the head of, and we just don't want to like butt in on the other person's department, basically, because we know that that's not what our strength is, and
Mhm.
so we just trust the other person to take care of that piece. And I think that that is just like one of many ways, but for us it's a pretty easy way to share labor and also to build trust with one another. um, we also kind of run our household that way, like we don't try to share out cooking. I do the vast majority of the cooking. Tyler does all the driving. Tyler does all the laundry, stuff like that. We kind of like divvy up tasks rather than try to do like percentages of the same tasks. And I think that that is also a strategy that we use in our working life. And it works for us. It works for us, just because of what our natural inclinations are. I feel like we started we started collaborating on our first book, like truly collaborating, like co-writing. Because before that, when we first started the company, I was doing like the editing and stuff like that. But we co-wrote our first book, American Terrorist, when we became parents, like when we became new parents. And you would think that that would be a fucking disaster. Sorry, I have a potty mouth, but but actually,
Yeah.
being new parents of, bless her, we love Maddie, obviously, but like she was a high maintenance baby. She was colicky. She was just a really tough infant, and especially to have as your first, that's like, woo.
Yeah.
She had every breastfeeding issue under the sun. It was crazy. I was dealing with like, nursing strikes and just everything. We were dealing with that because, Tyler had to do this like thing where he like put her on his forearm, and he had to like, I have to show it to the camera. He had to like bounce her, show her the bounce.
Huh?
So
Oh.
so she was like draped
Yeah, their
with her
head was like here in my hand. And yeah, I just walked around like holding her. Imagine a
Wow.
baby on his forearm.
Yeah, he had to do that for hours with Maddie to
Oh
like,
my gosh.
to keep her chill. And she's like a super chill teen now, so she's like, paying us back. Um,
Yeah.
but it was I'm painting a picture of the environment in which we were co-writing our first book, which you would think would be a disaster, but actually the fact that we had this separate space that was
Mhm.
totally apart from the mundane slog of early parenting,
Mhm.
I think that really like was wonderful for our relationship, and it was wonderful for our mental health. It was this
Mhm.
incredible escape, and it became this source of intimacy. And uh, when we had, the inevitable sorts of like jostling that one does in a creative collaboration, when we didn't agree on something, when we didn't agree with a storyline, or we didn't agree on, you know, me taking out his dad jokes, which was that is a huge point of contention always.
That was a sore spot.
Oh,
That's
it's
good.
always a sore spot. Although I will say, for anyone out there who ever collaborates with him, he's highly bribable. Like food. And
Wow.
for me only, also sex. So
I didn't know so much rode on the balance of what jokes made it into the story. Now I'll be more aware.
I know you gotta find the currency. Find their currency. But I think that when you have honest disagreement, and when you're able to come to the table with, um, being being clear on what you think and what you feel, and being respectful about what the other person thinks and feels, and you can sort of, find not even find a negotiation, because sometimes one person does win and the other doesn't. But when you come to that space in a differentiated way, I think that you can then achieve this kind of incredible intimacy, and it can be an erotic charge, frankly.
Hmm. I'm gonna have to do some research on that. I'm just thinking of that joke book that everyone's probably seen at the bookstores. It's like porn for women. It's like photos of guys vacuuming and putting the dishes the right way into the
That's called
dishwasher.
chore play.
Chore play.
Chore play. It's a thing.
Did you just come up with that portmanteau, or is that an actual thing?
Yeah.
No, I think for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and so the problem is actually me. It's like I can't relinquish projects because I feel personally responsible for them, and
Mm.
so like even when I'm like in over my head, like I will not let anyone help me because I'm like I want to do it. Let me do it.
Wow.
I said I would do it, so I'll do it, and then it just becomes difficult like for people to like say, oh, by the way, can you do this too, because then by then I'm already like, what else do you want to give me
I
to
get
do?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something I learned about myself through being a business partner with my spouse, was
Uh-huh.
that like that's my flaw. I have to work on that. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not so much like he can't do this, he can't do that. It's actually I need to actually let him
Yeah.
take on things, and trust him that he can definitely do it well.
I think
Um,
that was something that I learned in early parenting, actually.
mhm,
That, yeah, and I feel like I scaffolded off that into the work. But I think, Tyler and I have separate projects too, and I think that that helps in a sense, because we can dive into those separate projects, and allow for all of our like control freak shit to happen there. And then
mhm.
when we come together to do collaborative work, we've kind of already expended that controlling energy elsewhere.
Yeah,
If that
yeah,
makes sense, it's a kind of
yeah.
like
No, it makes total sense because
compartmentalization thing.
this is what I do. This is me when I'm like working with my husband. I'm like I feel like I'm doing
Oh,
everything.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's really just me. It's all in my head. The reality is, if I actually look, I'll notice he's doing a ton of stuff too. He's
Right.
just not saying, "Here, look, I did this. Here, look, I did that."
Yeah.
He's doing it.
I've really noticed actually that, especially in this pandemic year, which has been like so busy and exciting work wise, like I produced, well, I got an agent, I got a literary agent, and then with her, I produced 4 drafts of my novel, which is a literary fiction novel, and sold it on the 10th draft. So, I secured the agent on the 6th draft, and then through the pandemic we wrote 4 drafts together, and then sold the book, and now I'm looking at even more drafts with the publisher. But
Mhm,
of course, that's a scary task, right? Like any sort of revision is a scary task, and
mhm.
having to dive into that during a pandemic, when my parents are living here with us, when we're homeschooling our kids, I mean, it was super scary. What
Mhm,
I found that was really interesting was that when Tyler and I would then get together to do Embodied, or to rewrite American Terrorists, which we did during that time, or to put together any of the other books that we published during this calendar year, it was a comfort to me. It was like, okay, so I'm alone with my other manuscript, and that's really scary. But in this space, I have Tyler to do this script together. And, it just felt like there was someone helping to hoe that row.
Yeah, I mean, definitely working with someone who's a good creative partner, but also good, co-parent and spouse.
Absolutely, yeah.
It means that it means it reminds you that you're working on a team. That
Yes.
it's not just sort of like you're always in competition for attention with other things,
Absolutely.
or that you're in competition for attention from them. It's just, no, you're a team and you're going to help each other succeed at your, shared projects along with your solo projects, which sometimes, as we all know, that's kind of like the extra child
Yeah.
in that relationship because they want attention too. Tyler, you look very accomplished, Tyler. You have this look comes over your face where you're like,
it's all an act. I'm just trying to sell
We
it.
have a question here.
Do we have a question?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so Fluffer Stumps, who we have no idea who that is. How does collaboration work with a spouse, significant other, and you not end up hating each other? Well, I mean,
tell the audience, sir.
Secrets, Tyler.
I mean, I guess we're lucky. I don't know how it happens. You have to like. Well, I mean, you have to know how you. Oh, excuse me, I'm off the camera there. Let me get closer. How do you not end up? I don't know what the secret is. You have to find a way where how you like to work doesn't necessarily get pushed in on too much. I mean, you have your boundary, which was a word that was brought up, but you come to terms with what you are going to. Where is the space that you need filled in, and if you can do that for each other. If not, maybe you just discover it's better not to work together, and that's fine. I don't think a relationship has to be also a work relationship.
Right.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I think that over the years, our biggest point of contention has always been scheduling.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's more difficult because you're also in a relationship where you need the other person to take care of the family or the home so you can do your own work. Like sometimes I don't want to collaborate. I just want, let's just split up the time so I can work on something rather than just try to talk something out when there's things I can be doing.
Yeah.
I know it's you, Aaron. I was just joking.
Yeah, that's one of his dad jokes, Aaron.
Okay.
We know Fluffer Stumps is Aaron.
Do either of you ever will just say, I need a day away to do my thing?
I mean,
I'm
can
going
we
to take
say
my
that?
own art residency. Just leave.
Well,
I mean,
but
I'll be back on Monday.
I'll take one of those, please.
That's part of the communication, though. I mean, I think that, we definitely come together and plan out, let's say I'm like, okay, so I've got a deadline for the manuscript, for the fiction manuscript, and I've got to get that in 3 weeks. So, we plan around that. We plan our projects around that. We plan our collaborative stuff around that. And, and vice versa. When Tyler right now is actually under the gun with one of his projects that we're publishing, that he's editing. And so, we've had to put a bit of a stop on a couple of other things that we're collaborating on. So, I think that it requires communication and it requires flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And trusting that, when you take a back seat, that you will get your turn.
And that's so important, especially as partners and also team members and spouses, is that it's not just 50-50. It's
Right.
going to be 80-20. It's going to be 20-80. Sometimes it's going to be 1-99, but that it goes back the other way too.
Yeah.
That you're making space for each other to kind of find a rhythm, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Not necessarily scorekeeping, because I think that could be very toxic to any kind of relationship, personal or professional. It's like the scorekeeping, it creates resentment.
Yes.
And resentment can be very poisonous to any kind of relationship.
Yeah, I think you can sit down and have a conversation about it. Like if anyone's feeling they need more of this or more of that, it's going to be collaborative, not the scorekeep competitive. Yeah.
I think being honest and not judgmental about what you yourself need, eliminating the kind of shame and guilt around asking for things is a big one. I mean, I know that was for me, just being able to say straight up, I need this, this, and this, and to not not project onto that all kinds of negative responses that he probably is not having, but my projection is what causes the problem, you know?
Right.
So eliminating that piece and just saying, okay, so this is what's happening and this is what I would like, or this is what I would need. Can you do that for me?
Mhm. So I'd love to see what you both created in response to
Did you do
the
something
prompt.
else?
No, I did my,
She did
yeah, I
words.
did my words.
Again,
Yes.
because I think we had a great discussion. But
Yes.
that should definitely be side by side on the screen.
I just drew a picture. This is an interpretation of Wendy's words.
This is an interpretation of my words.
Yep. I have no other explanation.
What is it?
No explanation. It's open for interpretation.
That kind of looks like a trophy on top of a cake.
That sounds amazing. I want a trophy on top of the cake.
I made you a cake yesterday.
Can I eat the cake? Well, that's the thing about cake. You always need a new one.
Yeah, it's gone already.
Yeah.
Lo and behold.
I love how you both, uplift each other's strengths, but you also share, your weaknesses, and that, those weaknesses are places that are opportunities to grow. It's not like, oh, I suck at this, therefore I will always suck at this. It's more like, oh, I didn't realize I'm not good at asking for help. I need to learn how to be better. So that brings to this question: draw or write your superpower as part of an awesome duo.
Ooh.
So this is your opportunity to brag or humble brag about like the things you bring to the partnership that that you can actually own and say, like, I'm actually the better one at doing this.
I bring a lot of comic books to the relationship. A lot of them. Any comic you want. You want Dazzler? I got him. X-Men? Tons.
Yeah, well, actually, that's interesting. So, I think that a big point of contention for a lot of comics couples is there's like a stereotype, and it's this particular stereotype is probably rooted in reality, that the male partner has who has a comic book collection, like usually that is a big point of contention between particularly men and women. But I think I actually do know a gay comics couple where that is also a point of contention, like the money that is spent by one of the partners on comics collecting and art and stuff like that. But I think actually one of our superpowers is the fact that I've always been super supportive of it. Like I see that as literally an investment, which has borne out. Like we have totally, like, spoiler, like we have totally sold some of his collection to fund our books. And so and not to mention the interior art that he collects too. So, I'm thrilled that he does it, and I completely admire and trust his dedication to it.
I lucked out. I didn't know Disney was going to buy Marvel and make all these movies, and now these comics are so valuable. It's just crazy when I see I'm like, oh no, wait, I'll sell this comic for that much money. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I still have a ton of it, but there has been some key first appearances, or somebody that was in one of the TV shows now all of a sudden this random issue is worth something.
Gotta sell that, babe, because Maddie's orthodontic work.
Yeah, that's right.
It's so true, though. I mean, that's sort of like the whole business of art speculation. When you talk about quote unquote fine art, these people who are going to Art Basel, they're not really interested in the art, but they're interested in deferred returns, the value. Like they're waiting for the price of the artwork to go up, and then they sell it. But there's no love in it. I think that's what differentiates between an art collector versus a fan.
Yeah.
Like someone who's like, I love this work so much. Like I will save every dollar I have to have this issue because it means so much to me. And because there's more heart in it. And I think for my relationship with my husband, we don't have a lot of shared common interests other than, our love for filling every room with books, our love for mosh pits and whatnot. But for me, I feel like I bring strategy to my partnership and relationship. My husband, bless his soul, he is the most generous person I've ever met. So kind, so compassionate. but he does things because he loves it, and he doesn't really have like in my opinion, like a sense of like the end of the road, like how many steps should this process be, like why are we doing this, like, and if we want to achieve certain things along the way, like how are we going to achieve those things. He's more of like, if people want me to do something, I would do it for them, and that's it. I'm very much more of like, well, let's ration our energy,
Mm.
because our energy, like our lives, is not bottomless or limitless. So with our limited time, like how can we be the most effective, but not also exhaust ourselves to the
Mm.
point where we can't do this again. So
I feel like that's a
mm,
complementary kind of situation there. And I will say too that I benefit from your strategy, because I like to check in with you on, like, these sort of key professional moments in my literary life, and you offer me this really like bracing advice about strategy. So I appreciate it.
I wish I could say he does too, but I can't really ask him that question yet. Tyler,
Yeah.
what about you?
I'm breaking with the mold here, and I'm going to words here. Because it's drawing would take me long. I just came up with 4 words there: structure, support, plot, humor. Because my dad
Nice.
jokes are good.
Oh, your dad jokes are. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying that I had a good sense of humor.
Oh, we were doing for each other.
Oh, I don't know. I
I
mean,
lost. Was
I
I
was
writing
doing
out?
like as a couple. I'm
Your
confused.
superpower
My personal superpower?
that you bring to
Your
our
personal superpower.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I gotta revise this.
It seems like you both wrote some similar shared words, so maybe you are truly Batman and Robin, or Batman and Catwoman.
Batman and Catwoman. That's so funny because Tyler has collected for me over the years all this like Catwoman stuff, like Catwoman memorabilia and swag. And I think the first birthday that I had with you as a couple, Tyler drew me this like incredible drawing of Catwoman, like me as Catwoman, like Catwoman with my face, which was like really nice.
It was all right.
I love it.
It was all right. Yeah.
It's in my office. Pride of place. Yeah.
Yep. She's my Catwoman. Which just means I'm Batman. So I just wanted a reason to be Batman.
I'll take it.
I think those are definitely the best partnerships, where you are each other's cheerleader, and even when you disagree, you still support each other's dreams, right? You're not tearing each other down. You're saying, okay, let's change our perspective, let's change tactics, but let's still try to help you achieve your goal, even though we didn't expect ABC to happen. And those ABCs are always interesting. So, brings me to my last question is,
I have an answer though. I have an answer to this one. Okay. So as a couple, our superpower is conflict resolution leading to erotic energy.
Just had to get that.
And my personal, is that why you were snickering?
You've been trying to sneer this conversation. Just trying to get some dirty.
I'm not being dirty. This is real life. And my personal superpower is I am open to self-evaluation and change.
Those are very, very important. And I think Cosmo knows all about the power of breakup sex and makeup sex. And then one day, when Maddie is open to it, she can be like, ew.
Oh, she's already like super ew.
You're so scandalized by us.
She is.
That's why, I mean, it's working our advantage as a teenager. She wants nothing to do with any of this. She's like, I see my parents act like that. I don't want any of that.
I was in the same place. I remember being 17 and my parents were like in their 40s. And I think my friend at school was like, I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but I saw your mom, and is she pregnant or just fat? And I'm like, well, mind your own business, first of all. Secondly, my parents are like, oh, I'm 17. My parents have been married for like 20 years. You don't have sex anymore. It's disgusting. It's gross. Old people don't have sex, okay? Period. Don't ask me. And then like my mom, like the next week was like, hey, I'm pregnant. I'm like, ugh, ugh. Oh my God, really? Like, yeah, I'm pregnant. I'm like, did you go to the doctor and get inseminated? It's like, no, we did it. I'm like,
Yeah.
ah, oh my God. So like I like now that I'm like her age when I was 17 and thinking like that's so gross, I'm thinking like God, I was so obnoxious.
Mhm.
Of course my parents are having sex. They probably still are having sex.
Let's hope.
Let's hope. But it's just like the funniest thing. I wanted to ask you, the last question was draw or write your worst enemy, villain, or nemesis.
Oof.
Dun, 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 dun. Got some ideas.
And again, for anyone who's here live or watching this after the recording date, feel free to draw or write, respond to any of these prompts and share it um, in the comments on YouTube, share on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, and hashtag AWBW at A Wave Blue World. Love to see what you write or draw. Speaking of which, an enemy or a nemesis or a villain. You know, when I was little, I thought my supervillain was my little sister because we had to share a room and we were like oil and water.
Oh.
And so like one of the things that we would do for each other, she was also very artistic, was each morning I would leave like a really like not very complimentary doodle portrait of her on her bed, and she would leave one on my bed just to kind of be like, this is what you look like.
Oh.
Now we're friends.
What's your age
But
gap?
our age gap was 4 years.
Ah.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so like when she was walking, I was already going to school. And so like 4 years was just enough um to make siblings jealous, but also just enough where we don't have to share clothes and toys and things like
Right. Yeah, Maddie and Lucy are 7.5 years apart. And, I'd say that during the pandemic, they have definitely gotten closer. Because there's such an age gap, their social lives and all of their activities were so separate beforehand, and they barely spent any time together. But now that they are together all the time, they are really finding their way to each other. And Maddie's becoming much more nurturing, and Lucy is being more collaborative, and you know I love the idea of the nightly drawings, because Maddie does that for Lucy, which I find very
that.
sweet. Like, she draws these little rabbits in this little like scene, and this little like um, picture and word puzzle that she has to decode because Lucy's learning
Mhm.
to read, and it's really sweet. And I hope
Yeah,
that kind of like fortifies their lifelong relationship this time,
yeah.
this intimacy.
Well, this was my nemesis growing up, my little sister Lucy.
Lucy also.
Also Lucy.
Oh my God. I didn't know your little sister was Lucy.
So
Wow.
Lucy is a teacher based in Southern California, and she's a mother now. She's lovely. She's wonderful. She's a great mom, and she's really got a huge heart. But when we were little, we couldn't stand each
Mm.
other because I was very headstrong and she
Mm.
was very passive.
Oh,
And
interesting.
she felt that I was very bossy, and I felt that she was very spineless. And
Mm.
so we were just very different people. Um, but we pulled some pretty good pranks on each other. So we were always a great source of entertainment. So, like, for example, in the 90s, the X Files was a huge thing. And I would make her watch the X Files with me. And because of that, she had a phobia of aliens and she was afraid of being abducted. So I went to
Oh.
Target and I bought some glow in the dark crayons, and her bed had these like wooden posts. And so like one day while she was doing her homework in the living room, I went into our bedroom and I took the glow in the dark crayons and I started drawing crop circles on her bedposts.
Oh my God.
And then I basically opened the shades and let the sunlight in so they would like, power up. And then at night when she went to bed, she saw these glowing marks all around. Like she screamed and she was like, oh my God, what does this mean? I'm like, oh my God, you've been marked. You've been marked for abduction. I know, it was horrible. She totally believed me. And she was like crying. She's like, I don't want to go. I'm like, it's too late. There's nothing anyone can do. You've been marked. But like I have to credit to sharing a room with her because it also taught me like um like even if you don't get along with someone, you can still find things to find things to do, find ways to compromise with each other. But the pranks I feel were like the highlight because the pranks now are hilarious.
Mm.
And we just go like, I can't believe you fell for that. But at the time, the pranks were everything. There were so many times like she totally outpranked me, and like it was annoying then, but now that I look back at it, it's like the best part of my childhood. It's like
Oh.
remembering sharing my room with my little sister. Um, it
Oh.
definitely was not fun at the time.
They often have sleepovers, our girls, which I think is very sweet too.
I don't know. I think it surprised us. Maybe we're too critical of the way they fight sometimes or don't get along. Maybe that's normal. We didn't really know. You didn't have a sibling, and
Yeah.
the age gap I think worked differently with my sister and I because we were. I feel like the distance was enough that we didn't have the conflict or the rivalry, and probably mixed gender too.
Yeah, the gender difference makes
So
it
I
a
didn't
big difference.
really, didn't have the daily conflict anyway. So maybe when we see it, we're just like, why can't you just be nice to your sibling? They are your sister. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, maybe that's not really how it is. So it's always good to hear other people that have had conflicts, and especially that it turned out
Exactly.
fine and they love each other now. So because that's what
Yeah.
we want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm ready to show
Okay. Let's see.
my
Your
nemesis
next
enemy.
Mhm.
Racism and misogyny smash the patriarchy and dismantle white supremacy. Absolutely. So Wendy, when did you like come into like this sort of awakening of not just your strength in sociology and these terms, but also like the ability to communicate them and embed them with your own personal experience with conviction. Like I think for many people of color, when we first start thinking about racism, there's still a part where like we're a little hesitant. We're like, well, maybe I misread the situation,
Mm.
or maybe that didn't really happen that way. How did you kind of step into your power?
Whew, that's been a continual process. That's really been a continual process because I would say that, I was still kind of drinking the Kool-Aid when I was in academia, when I was in the system.
Mhm.
And I think to a certain degree, as a woman of color in elite institutions, you have these necessary blinders, and the process of decolonizing your own mind is slow and it happens in layers, So I would say that like my biggest moment of awakening, and probably this is true for a lot of people in this country, not just people of color in this country, but people in general in this country, was the election in 2016. I think that it shocked the hell out of me. And I think that, much much like so many of us, we saw um, what had been narrated as an underbelly of American culture as being far more mainstream than we realized, far more
Mhm.
pervasive than we knew. And I think we also built a vocabulary for understanding not just systemic racism across the board, but also, things like microaggressions, things like racial gaslighting, all of these kinds of, everyday terms that are normal for us now. They were new. They were relatively new, in the past 10 years. And they've given voice to these feelings that we've had all along, but that we would kind of dismiss and minimize within ourselves. I think that there's been a marriage between the language of psychology and the language of I guess, critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
Those two have collaborated in a way that I think has really served us in the past few years. And that would be, I think, the silver lining of the past, our national nightmare is what I like to call it, and
Yeah.
I think that's the silver lining of it. So I think, yeah, I found much more of a voice during that time, and I think many of us have as well.
Mm-hmm. How do you see a wave blue world, kind of like participating in the decolonization of our cultural expectations
Hmm.
about whiteness being a very, central or quote unquote normal and expected experience?
Yeah.
Because I think you're absolutely right. I think also another point is, sometimes these terms may seem a little bit too academic for your common person who has never read a sociology textbook. Critical race theory, like they have no idea what that even means. Like,
Or they're
what do you mean?
terrified of it.
Right, it's like it sounds like a really scary big idea, and it sounds like you're just trying to make me sound or feel not as smart as you are. So like, and I feel like comics are a great way to kind of break down that barrier to kind of say, okay, well, yes, the words can be a little intimidating, but like it's a very simple concept. Like, let's use different kinds of language. Let's use different writers' perspectives, visual language as well,
Hmm.
color as a language to convey like the intention and sort of like the questions
Yeah.
at the root of critical race theory. Like, so for a wave blue world, like is decolonizing is decolonizing that literature intentional, or is it just sort of like a happy coincidence from the collaborations that you
You bet your sweet ass it's intentional.
have?
Yeah, but we go at it in different ways. I think that the sort of like normative way of diversifying culture is through representation, right? And that can lead to tokenization, and that can lead to just kind of like ticking the box of diversity by, casting a couple of people of color in a movie or something like that. Or, putting a couple of characters who have, a slightly more olivey brown complexion in your comic book. That's not what we're interested in doing. We're interested in telling real in-depth stories about you know people from all walks of life. And we also have a tendency, I think, to Trojan horse these kinds of more academic ideas or challenging ideas in entertaining packages, and not just in a kind of like didactic educational way, that's like eating cardboard, you know, but in a way that's kind of natural and that's kind of true to life, and that is a portrayal of a broadening of our imagination, I think,
Mhm.
because the cultural imagination in the United States has been an imagination that is white. And what we're trying to do is to just pull the camera out and show that there are many other stories, and they are
Right.
not only white, and
And
they
this is
are all
not
legitimate.
right, and it's not a critique on the value of white culture or quote unquote white culture. It's more of a critique on narrative dominance. Like, who gets to
Exactly.
talk more? Whose experiences definitely get shown more without question, versus those who have to push and push and push and argue and plead, like, please, like, can you please show my story?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, someone will be interested in my story. I guarantee you.
So it's about
Um,
narrative plenitude, like you were just
yeah.
saying, like the concept of narrative plenitude as opposed to scarcity, and as
Right.
opposed to the impoverishment of the imagination when we only see artists and writers of color in a very sort of like narrow way. Like, we're not interested in publishing trauma porn, for example.
Right.
We're not interested in publishing the same old story over and over again about, you
Mhm.
know, immigrants making good after struggling and, making lots of money and becoming,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly, living
Yeah.
large, right?
I usually call that like the faux aesthetics, which is my way of saying that quote unquote ethnic literature, vis-a-vis what's considered like normal literature or regular relative, uh, sorry, not relative, but relatable literature, basically means that the reader has to work a lot harder to understand like the story and to understand like what's normal in the story. And sometimes I think, when you think about what people thought of as ethnic literature as being too hard to understand, well, I counter that by saying, well, if you like to read fantasy, if you like to read science fiction, if you like to read steampunk, if you like and you can contain the multiplicity of the Marvel, universe, you can understand ethnic literature. It's
Right.
not really that hard of a leap because
Exactly.
it means that you have a great imagination, you're smart, you can connect characters, you can connect conflicting timelines, and you can also, read them as allegorical tales about politics,
Absolutely.
about racism,
Absolutely.
about McCarthyism. You can read them as political stances on past events, and like also as a premonition of like, well, the future could be better,
Yeah.
if we do better.
And that's
It's not
precisely
hard
what
to leap.
Tyler's doing in his new YA book, right? I
Mhm.
mean, he's tackling issues of toxic masculinity, he's tackling issues of power, and you should speak for yourself. And
Yeah, I'd love
yeah,
to hear more about what
Well,
what you're
I think,
working on.
I mean, so many of the genres that comics do, whether they're comics, movies, or whatever, I mean, we're talking fantasy, superhero, they deal with marginalized communities, they deal with power structures, the empire, um, things like that. So th- it took a while for the characters to actually be represented with diversity and things like that, but the themes are always there, right? I mean, and superhero started with like the powerless dreaming of power. There's the Jewish immigrants or whatnot. X-Men was an analogy for like the civil rights movement. Now,
Yeah,
again, they were all white to begin with, so that took a while to catch up. So I mean, we're trying to do that as well, but um, you can still address those themes through story, and it just fits. Like it doesn't have to be overtly
exactly.
about current politics. I mean, we're not afraid. We don't shy away from that either. But we can just write a pure fantasy story, and those themes are just naturally in there. It's not us forcing them in, and that's what I felt with Orphan King. I mean, um, did a YA book, and I've experimented, had diverse characters in my books, kind of through there, but I didn't. It's not really my lane to go too deep into that. But what I could do was write a story about this King Arthur type character. He's got a different name, Caden, uh,
mhm,
and his experience broadening his horizons in this world. And I just thought there was something you could do with this King Arthur storyline where he spent more time learning about this world around him and the the patriarchal system, which it's not meant as a super criticism of the medieval areas. Obviously, the time was the time, but
mhm.
unpacking that a little bit to how that fits with
Yeah.
today and going on that adventure.
And he
Yeah.
grapples with ideas of privilege and power.
Yeah.
And I think that so many writers and artists since time immemorial have tackled the same cycles of, abuse, the attainment and the abuses of power. Just listening to you describing the arc of Orphan King, it reminds me also of Candide.
Yes.
You know, like this sort of like it's sort of comical, but it's also a very serious story about, like what the world was like at that time. And you have these characters who are literally embodying philosophy, like philosophical stances. You have someone who believes that the world only exists because he thinks it exists, and so it exists in his head. And you have someone who says, the world is wonderful. It's everything's fine. Everything happens for a reason. Another person who says everything is chaos. And so, reading that, it's very well told, which is its strength, but it's also a story that resonates through time because those I think those archetypes will continue to persist and will and we will, as individuals, continue to ask ourselves, like, how could this, how could we do better? Like,
Yeah.
what lessons can we impart on the next generation? Like to say, okay, pay attention, because you can do better than we did. Um, I think the ultimate gift of any artist is that whatever we create, whatever form or shape it takes, is that hundreds of years later that people are still discovering it. And I feel like if there was one work in particular that either of you have created together or separately that should be rediscovered 3 millennia from now, what do you think it would be?
Wow. Well, what do you think?
I mean, there's some things in the process that we're developing, which would be nice if it were those. I mean, American Terrace is our most complete one, and I'm sure that will still have relevance, maybe sadly, in decades from now. I think that's probably the best answer for now. I mean,
Yeah, we've got things in the pipeline that we can't really talk about yet, but that we hope are, you know, going to ring that bell of being simultaneously of the moment, but also timeless.
Yeah. Well, embodied, I think, fits that too.
That's
I
true.
didn't mention that. I mean, that the poetry, the verse in that is pretty timeless, and the art will
That's true.
always stand up. So, and I think it'll always be something unique
Mhm.
to see art and poetry combined in that way. So,
Yeah, that was.
Speaking of which, you two have sort of created a new subgenre, graphic poetry.
we
Do
try.
you think do you think you're going to get a lot of copycats from that?
Well, I mean, it's already been kind of a thing. We just did our new riff on it.
Mhm.
I think our take on it firstly was, ours is the first anthology of comics poetry, but the thing that we really tried to do that was perhaps somewhat different was to create sequential art narratives, to create stories from the poems that were not necessarily just a retelling of the text. You know, is that a
We
good
were
way to
trying to like
describe it?
just illustrate the poem or do a vignette or represent the actual meaning of the poem in text. Like this wasn't meant to be an explanation. It was
Mhm.
just, I mean, much like when you have a script and the artist gets it, they still sort of tell their own story with it. So
Yes.
read
Yeah.
this. That was the job for the artist. Read this and draw a story from it that it can fit as captions to go along with it.
Yeah.
And so we try to lean into that side, and that's what's different. That's what's unique about it. Not necessarily forging entirely new ground,
Yeah.
but definitely, going in that direction.
I love the cinematic feel that it has
Mm.
brought to the poems, and I'm anticipating the release of your individual poem videos on your YouTube
Oh
channel.
yeah.
They look really really cool,
Thank you.
and also I feel like this could be the beginning of like a new way to introduce poetry to much younger audiences,
We
That's
hope
exciting.
right?
so.
Yeah.
Who may have some resistance to poems because, as you all know, like a lot of the poetry and things that we read in K through 12 is pretty just standard,
Right.
Shakespeare and stuff. Things that like most students are like, what does this person know about, my feelings?
Right. Right.
But then to break that down with this is such a cool way to deliver poetry to a new set of eyes.
Yeah. It's definitely not dry, and it's definitely not, passionless. So,
Well, when one of your artists is trying to draw an invisible vagina, as in episode 3, I think it was Miss
yeah.
who was talking about drawing an invisible vagina. It's like, yes, that is quite a dilemma as an artist. How do you
So she came up with a cosmic vagina instead,
do
which is, that's a brilliant strategy.
that? Birthing worlds, the universe, and meaning all together. Tyler, who is your villain?
Oh, I mean, a little obvious there, but I drew the clock. Time.
Wow.
Never have enough time.
Ooh.
If I had more time, I could get more done. I
So
don't
it
know.
sounds to me that the creation of a wave blue world was your way to get back at your nemesis, both time and racism and misogyny. Like
Wow.
that was just like a happy way to respond, right, to the things that were sources of stress. I mean, of course, time is always short, but when you have a business partner who supports you, like it's actually time well used, right?
Right.
And I guess also, you know, everyone who creates art and literature, they want to beat time in a sense, in the sense that they want to leave behind these artifacts that are timeless and that will persist well after their own deaths, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the anthology embodied, the individual poem videos being released, is it weekly?
Yeah, we're doing weekly now for
Each
the
week?
month of June. Should
Uh,
go through there. Yeah, so one each week for the next 4 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah, and I did see that you guys did do a limited edition holofoil cover, which looks super cool.
Yeah, we've got a little
Um,
poster in there too.
Yeah, that was
yeah,
for
and
Independent
so
Bookstore Day.
people can now buy the book anywhere, or would you prefer that they check it out online and buy it online, or
You can
is
buy it
there
whatever their preference is. I mean, you can order it from the big shops like Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. You can find an independent bookstore, a comic book shop, and
Bookshop.org.
yeah, or you can find it on our website, awbw.com, which
Mhm.
We'll do signed copies if you
we'll
buy
sign
them
it.
from our shop, if you want that.
Yeah.
Nice? Will Maddie or Lucy be adding a drawing?
I mean, they can always write me. I'm not going to assume somebody wants one of their drawings on the copy, but I'm sure they'd happy to be obliged if we got a note that said that.
Yeah.
Oh. And
So
then finally, like, what's new or what's coming up next for Away from the World? Do you have any Kickstarters or any projects currently in the works that need to get funded and need more people to say yes, absolutely, we need this book?
yeah, that's coming up next June 1st, next Tuesday. So less than a week. We're kickstarting the sequel to Deadbeats, Deadbeats 2, London Calling. So if anybody likes to do Kickstarters, I know that has its audience and its appeal. That will launch coming, yeah, next week. And
So that's our musical horror anthology.
mm,
And in the Kickstarter video, if you like Maddie and Lucy, you'll see a little bit more of them in that too.
we're handing over that role to them.
We're doing some child labor.
Yeah.
But to be fair, Maddie said that it's like her favorite.
Yes. Yeah, this was her favorite book. She likes it. So yeah, she did the video and yeah.
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 She's like you and Lee, she's like very into music.
Yeah. Yeah. Except, I think she has more discipline than we do when it comes to like, drawing, writing, reading, and corresponding with others, and also being on video. She's very fun to watch on video. Yeah, so for everyone who joined us today for our lovely chat about the reality of, falling in love, having kids, starting a comic book publishing company together, and then 15 years later, still doing it and still staying strong. Definitely, if you have any questions that weren't answered during the session, feel free to check out Away from the World on Twitter or Facebook, Instagram. Oh, do you have a question?
Rodriguez. Well, no, there's not a question. He just said hello. Hi, Val.
Hi, Val.
Artist of Mezzo, Val Rodriguez is on the chat.
Chiming in from Brazil.
Yeah. So
yeah.
We just wanted to acknowledge him.
Exactly. A little shout out to Val and his amazing art.
Wait till you talk about upcoming projects. I mean, that'll be early 22, but Mezzo number 2, volume 2 is going to be amazing.
Sci-fi fantasy.
Super excited about it. So, yeah.
Totally. In the meantime, if you had fun looking at our prompts and you wanted to share your own responses, whether it's a word or a drawing, go ahead and check out A Wave Blue World on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Leave a note, tweet, post, tag them. It's at A Wave Blue World. You can use the hashtag AWBW. And also, this video will be on YouTube until the end of time. And so you can leave a comment there too.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You've been an amazing guest host, and you've definitely gotten us to get personal. It was super fun.
Yeah.
It was like the Newlywed Game, except, like the old oldly wed game.
Oldly wed game. But I think after 15 years, you know, you're completely different people by then. So you're like newlyweds again.
Oh, yes.
In a way,
Yes.
yes.
It was such a pleasure to be part of all of this. And I look forward to, you know, the new books coming through the pipeline. I also look forward to the kickoff for the new Kickstarter campaign. And then, of course, all your updates online about what's going on and who's hot and what you're reading also. So glad to have two superheroes really decolonizing the comic book industry and also as publishers, you know, doing exactly what you believe in, which is creating great, beautiful books for everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
And thanks everyone for watching. 2 weeks, June 10th, we got another episode. We're going to have some creators from Deadbeats 2 on. So it'll all be a fun episode. So we hope you'll come back.
And in the meantime, remember, we are your comic book parents. This is Mom and Pop Comics Talk. Wash your hands, brush your teeth, and read your comics.
Get some rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to bed.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.